So, it's been enough time since Tucker Carlson's 3-day special propaganda operation. I figured I'd wait for a bit because I knew he'd release some other videos from his quick trip to Russia, not just the interview with Volodya. Now, how did I know that? Well, because that's exactly what I would have done as well. Sure, I would have likely chosen a very different framing, but from a technical perspective, this is how you do these things. Release the main event first and then keep the controversy alive for further installments. After all, he went with a team of 4 people, himself, 2 camera operators and an editor. It would have been very weird if the only thing he had videotaped and prepared to release was the 2-hour podcast with Volodya. So, how did it all go? Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so first let's get this out of the way. Calling Tucker Carlson a traitor is unhinged. Now there's so many names in the book you can call Cucker after his 3-day or actually 8-day special propaganda operation, but traitor is not one of them. I mean, heck, John Stossel did a segment for ABC News in 1988 praising the Moscow metro. Imagine that, with Ronald Reagan president and the Red Scare still de facto policy. Now, the segment was just as cringe as Tucker's segment. It was bad, and nowadays even Stossel agrees that it was bad. But it wasn't traitorous, and asserting so makes you part of the problem. Second, the way the left-wing press reacted to Tucker visiting Moscow was not just unhinged, but a bicycle kick own goal from the midfield. A spectacular failure. Now, mind you, I'm glad that both the left-wing press and Tucker Carlson decide to undermine themselves simultaneously, so I'm not trying to interrupt here, but it still needs to be said. Y'all be crazy, bro. Now, with that out of the way, goodness me, what a shit show. Between the press taking this statement of the craziest person in the European Parliament, that would be Guy Verhofstadt, and presenting it as a policy intent of the European Union, and doing so before the first 3 seconds of Tucker's podcast even airing. So between that and the actual podcast, which was so bad that nobody liked it, I don't know what to choose. I'm sure the intent was to be a propaganda video, but the end product is just bad. The Vatniks didn't like it, the Westerners didn't like it, Putin personally didn't like it, so from that perspective, I see that as an absolute win. Sure, it could have been even better, but all in all, this whole shit show came out really well from that perspective. Everyone got to see Volodya's craziness in its full splendor. I mean, even the most charitable interpretations only go as far as to say, wow, Volodya can still recite 30-minute stories while borking them only, I guess, once or twice. By the way, did you notice that Volodya compared himself positively with Hitler? Not to mention that Ukraine was invented by both Lenin and Stalin. Sure, all of this is funny, but Putin's intention was to use the interview as election propaganda inside Russia, and it did not quite work out as intended. Now, I guess from Putin's perspective, the same holds true. It could have been worse, but it wasn't great either. Now, here's Putin saying it and trying to find positives in the whole ordeal.
Во-первых, хорошо, что они смотрят и слушают то, что я говорю. Если нам сегодня по каким-то причинам, связанным с ними, не удается вести прямой диалог, то мы должны быть благодарны господину Карлсону за то, что мы можем это делать через него, как посредника. Так что то, что они смотрят, слушают, хорошо.
Карлсона ведь критиковали сразу и до интервью, а уж после интервью ему теперь вину ставят то, что якобы прозвучало мало жестких вопросов, якобы он был с вами слишком мягким, а вам с ним было очень комфортно. И вот как вы считаете, задавили ли вы американского журналиста своим авторитетом?
Я думаю, что ваш Карлсон, когда я говорю ваш, имею в виду, что он представитель вашего журналистского цеха, опасный человек. И вот почему. Потому что я-то, честно говоря, думал, что он как раз и будет вести себя агрессивно и будет задавать эти так называемые острые вопросы. Я не просто был к этому готов, а я этого хотел. Потому что это давало бы мне возможность также остро отвечать, что, на мой взгляд, придало бы определенную специфику всей нашей беседе. Но он избрал другую тактику. Он несколько раз меня пытался прерывать, но все-таки, на удивление для западного журналиста, оказался терпеливым, выслушивал мои длительные диалоги, особенно касающиеся истории, и не давал мне повода сделать то, к чему я был бы готов. Поэтому, откровенно говоря, полного удовольствия от этого интервью я не получил. Вот. Но он шел жестко по своему, судя говоря, по своему плану, и он свой план исполнил. Но насколько это было в конечном итоге содержательно, не мне судить, это просто зрители, слушатели, может быть, читатели полученного материала, они должны сделать свой вывод.
Now, to be fair, there is also a conspiracy theory that the whole thing was organized in order to maintain some contact and deliver some messages to Volodya that couldn't have otherwise been delivered, and vice versa, get messages from Volodya to the West. A conspiracy theory that Putin appears to partially endorse in his post-interview comments, even though Putin has correctly pointed out that contact with the West is not an impossibility and definitely not something difficult. The red phone is real, even though it's no longer literally a red phone anymore. Anyway, so in my first comment after the interview, which happened to be behind the paywall, less than 24 hours after the interview had been released, I did say that I'm waiting for Tucker to speak after he left Russia.
Uite, una dintre puținele întrebări bune puse de Tucker Carlson a fost fix aia, dar nu te temi cât îi colonizează China? Perfect legitimă întrebarea. Și răspunsul lui a fost whataboutism. Păi da, dar uite că Europa face și acolo ca Tucker Carlson ar trebui să stai să nu te întreba de Europa, te întreba tine, tu Rusia, tu Putin, lasă Europa, nu, tu. Când Europa este discuția, că prea multă dependență de China, polembeci, Rusia nu există o astfel de discuție.
Păi cum să ai o astfel de discuție când ăla e singurul tău partener comercial
viabil, da, cât de cât ești, discutăm imediat, că și acolo e complicat.
Și acolo e complicat, dar nu contează, pentru ruși încă se mai pot baza pe export-import China.
Da, și China se bazează pe cumpărat la bucăți din Rusia din ce în ce mai multe, da. Și rușii care locuiesc în bucățile deja cumpărate din China nu sunt de China, nu sunt
în
deloc
rest,
bucuroși.
interviul a fost... Băi, deci jur că mă uitam la Prelipceanu în timp ce îl intervieva pe Ciucă.
Ceva de genul, da.
Pe bune.
A ieșit...
Sau nu știu, pe Rareș Bogdan sau...
Nu, că Rareș Bogdan e entertaining, Putin n-a fost entertaining.
Yeah. Nici măcar n-a fost entertaining.
Da,
față de altă dată.
Față de alte dăți, da, alte dăți...
Cu conferințele lui de presă.
Până în 2019 inclusiv.
Da.
Din 2020 încoace n-a mai fost entertaining. Aștept, n-am văzut încă, bine, nici n-a fost timp. Tucker basically o strâns camerele după interviu, o filma segmentul de la începutul podcastului din balconul hotelului și în seara aia și s-a și cărat din Rusia. N-a apucat să ne spună, probabil că săptămâna viitoare bănuiesc, să ne spună cum a văzut el toată chestia asta. Mie mi se pare că n-a ieșit ce a avut el.
Nu fi avut voie să întrebe chestii?
Nu știu, bănuiesc că și asta a fost parte din înțelegere, habar n-am. Cert este că n-a ieșit cum a vrut el, dar îs curios, unele expresii faciale mie îmi trădau reacții de genul cu asta chiar e nebun. Nu, pe bune, asta chiar e dus capul, adică... dar nu știu dacă așa este, poate mi s-a părut mie de azi că
da, e de admirat la vârsta lui capacitatea de a memora informații a lui Putin.
Păi da, Volodya asta a făcut toată viața, ar fi și culmea, dacă pierde asta, atunci după aia trebuie să se interneze direct la psihiatrie, că altceva n-are.
Da, nu mai e nici propagandistul care era cu 15 ani.
Nici vorbă, da.
Well, in the meantime, he did. They suppose the arch anti-globalist Tucker Carlson found the time to go, wait for it, to the World Government Summit. And he went there to talk about his experience and about his interview with Volodya, because the clown world never stops. Anyway, so he clarified, sort of.
I'll start in reverse order. Why now? Well, I've been trying for 3 years to do this interview. The US government prevented me from doing it by spying on my text messages and leaking them to the New York Times. And that spooked the Russian government into canceling the interview. So I've been trying to do this, but my country's intel services were working against me illegally, and that enraged me because I'm an American citizen, I'm 54, I pay my taxes, I obey the law. And there was no expectation in the America that I grew up in that my government and its intel services, NSA and CIA, which were always outwardly focused on our foreign enemies, would be turned inward against American citizens. And I'm shocked by that, and I'm infuriated by that. And so once I discovered that that was happening, and I confirmed it was happening, and they admitted that they did it, then I was totally determined, monomaniacally dedicated to doing this interview, not simply because I want to know what Vladimir Putin is like and what he thinks about a war that is resetting the world and really gravely damaging my country's economy, but also because they told me I couldn't on the basis of illegitimate means and for no really clearly stated justification. And I thought that can't stand. I want to live in a free country. I was born in one. And I'm going to do whatever small thing I can do to maintain this society that I love.
Okay, though the evidence for that is kind of lacking, but for the sake of the argument, let's say all of it is true. But does Tucker really believe this hasn't happened to him and his communications in Russia as well? I hope not, for his personal sake in the first place. But seriously, wiretapping vloggers and journalists and propagandists is more or less the absolute norm everywhere. If you want to take that up as a cause, then fine, but please cut the crap. That's not why you interviewed Putin. Tucker, just like 100 other employees of the media, wanted to interview Putin for clicks, notoriety, and audience. And there's nothing wrong with that, mind you. I mean, he now runs a startup media company, the Tucker Carlson Network, I believe it's called. So a Putin interview puts his startup on the media map. Maybe, likely, for the wrong reasons, but in Tucker's profession, there's no such thing as bad publicity, or at least that's what he thinks, obviously. Because if he hadn't believed that, he wouldn't have stopped to praise Russian supermarkets. I mean, are you kidding me? I get the subway part. John Stossel and Bernie Sanders, as an elected official, did it before, and many others did it before. The Moscow subway really is beautiful, or at least some of the stations. It's not as safe as Carlson claimed, but then again, he doesn't speak Russian and only traveled in the foreigner-friendly circle of Moscow. But at least the Moscow subway is beautiful. So I get why someone ignorant about Russia would look at that and come out impressed. But supermarkets? Really? This is the point where any goodwill is just gone. Because if Tucker doesn't know, then he's an idiot. And if he does know, then he's arguing in bad faith. Now, what was he supposed to know? Well, the Rosstat data on wages in Russia. You don't even need to know Russian. Rosstat publishes reports in English as well, very detailed reports, in fact. The poorest Americans now spend about 15% of their income on groceries, up from 10% in 2020. The upper middle class Russians, the ones he saw in the supermarket, spend about 33% of their income on groceries, up from 14% in 2020. So, in other words, while the lot of the poorest Americans has worsened by as much as 50% in terms of groceries affordability, the lot of relatively well-off Russians has worsened by over 200%. And Tucker should know this. And again, if he doesn't know, then he's an idiot и там особо нечего делать. But if he does know, then he's either a legit agent of the Kremlin or just another Kremlin shill out of convenience. The latter being more likely, in my opinion, given his talk about being radicalized. Another reason I think it's the latter is also his response when asked about not challenging Volodya enough. Take a look.
I'll use the devil's advocate.
But advocate away.
Yes, okay, I'll tell you. You should challenge in the rules of an interview, and you're a master in your business. It's not for me to give you a lecture about that, but you should challenge some ideas. For instance, you didn't talk about freedom of speech in Russia. You did not talk about Navalny, about assassinations, about restrictions on opposition in the coming elections.
I didn't talk about the things that every other American media outlet talks about
Why?
exclusively.
Yes, this is
because
my
those are
question.
covered, and because I have spent my life talking to people who run countries in various countries and have concluded the following, that every leader kills people, including my leader. Every leader kills people. Some kill more than others. Leadership requires killing people, sorry. That's why I wouldn't want to be a leader. That press restriction is universal in the United States. I know because I've lived it. Ask my former, I've had a lot of jobs. And I've done this for 34 years, and I know how it works. And there's more censorship in Russia than there is in the United States, but there's a great deal in the United States. And so, at a certain point, it's like people can decide whether they think, what countries they think are better, what systems they think are better. I just want to know what he thinks. That was the whole point.
Well, first of all, no, not every leader kills people. I'm unaware of Bolsonaro killing anyone, for instance. But more broadly, this is standard whataboutism. Now, I understand cynicism. I really do. I mean, I dabble in cynicism in a single day more than Tucker has dabbled in his whole life. But cynicism needs to be balanced by a sense of proportion here. There is no American equivalent of the Arkhangelsk penal colony. That's a gulag in 2024. Guantanamo Bay is a literal walk in the park compared to the civilized gulags in Russia. There is no American equivalent of Boris Nemtsov or Anna Politkovskaya. Tucker is in no risk of being subjected to the Nemtsov or Skripal treatment for being a vocal opposition to the regime. And this intentional lack of sense of proportion is what will eventually kill the Tucker Carlson brand. And this is the last point. How will this affect the Tucker Carlson brand over a longer period of time? Yes, for now, it's obviously a huge hit. Of course it is. For whatever reason and through whatever means, you got what others have been coveting for years. Good stuff. But the way this opportunity was treated will reflect upon Tucker for many years to come. Eventually, the social media frenzy will go away, the November elections will pass, a new Congress will be elected, and the interest for whatever Tucker has to say will eventually subside. And then what? Heck, John Stossel needed a decade to rebound after the shame of praising the Soviet Union in 1988. And he benefited from the fact that there was no internet to remind him of this all the time. He also benefited from being graceful enough to, mock his own report. Now, obviously, I don't know what the future holds for Tucker, but I know this. Unless he can sustain the bombshells report's pace, the current financial and clout gains will be very short-lived. Anyone remembers Lara Logan? She's the one who broke the story of Taharush Jinsi being used as a weapon of war during the Egyptian Revolution. That was a true and shocking story, mind you. But then she gradually went full insane. Now sure, she retained a loyal fan base, but her influence diminished by over 90% in a very short period of time, because being stupid in public has a short-term and a long-term cost. You can work around the short-term cost, as Tucker Carlson has, but eventually it catches up with you. I guess we'll see what happens, but overall, I will say this. This whole Tucker-Putin saga was a win for those watching, but a loss for those involved in it. That would mean both Putin and Tucker. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a guy in a basement with a camera, well, technically two cameras. Sure, I've been to Russia more times and for longer periods than Tucker, and I didn't learn Ukraine exists only in 2014, but of course none of that matters in an age where short-term gains are the only currency. The good news is that it will get better. The bad news is that the competency crisis and the age of stupid is here to stay for a bit longer. But that's a story for another day. That's really all I had to say. So with all that being said, send me to the cartels, visit our website, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.